Hey everyone, I originally wanted to make this video because I was curious about why artificial banana flavoring tastes different than actual bananas. Turns out, the type of banana we eat is of the Cavendish variety, and the artificial flavoring we taste is derived from a banana known as the Gros Michel. The reason we don't eat the Gros Michel in North America is because we used to get them from South America, but it was ravaged by the Panama disease during the early 1900s and became all but extinct by the 1960s. Except that it didn't go extinct. They just can't be produced in South America anymore. These bananas are still really popular in Asian countries, and we're stuck with these garbage Cavendishes. Anyways, here are some species that are actually extinct, starting with the Atlas bear. Surprisingly, there are only 8 species of bear living in the world today, with 7 living in North America and Eurasia, and the 8th living in South America, meaning there are no bears around here. However, that wasn't true until the 1870s, with the Atlas bear being the only known bear to survive in modern times that lived in Africa, with all other bears doing so going extinct at least 5,000 years prior. The Atlas bear lived around the Atlas Mountains, hence the name, and coexisted with other species in that area, like trees such as the Atlas bear lived undisturbed in these regions for thousands of years until the rise of one little-known empire that started to meddle in the Atlas bear's day-to-day lives. It's Rome. I'm talking about the Roman Empire. Yep, the Romans used to fiercely hunt these bears for sport, which caused a significant decrease in the native population. Along with this, the Romans would capture some bears to fight against gladiators and other animals in the arena, and were sometimes even used to execute people. Yeah, the Romans were pretty pompous and egotistical during this time. They took what they wanted and didn't care about the consequences of their actions. Watch this. This overhunting severely crippled the Atlas bear for the next couple of millennia until a group of hunters finally killed the last Atlas bear in 1870, effectively snuffing out the species. But you know, this is probably just another subspecies of brown bear gone extinct. No big deal, right? Nope. Turns out the Atlas bear was almost like no other bear in the history of the world, geographically and evolutionarily. We actually don't know exactly which place the Atlas bear originated from, as remnants from the species are scattered all across Europe. Nah, I'm just straight up lying. It's Africa. You idiot. While we do know its geographic origin, its evolutionary origin is actually pretty mysterious. According to one genetic study done by exactly 7 French people and 1 Canadian guy, they were unable to link the Atlas bear to any modern brown bear species, which is the only species of bear that has lived even remotely near North Africa for the last 100,000 years. However, they did find that it shared some of the same mitochondrial DNA with another species of bear. Polar bears. Polar bears. So, polar bears evolved from a subspecies of brown bear, the grizzly, roughly 190,000 years ago during the Ice Age, meaning it could basically walk and settle anywhere because of the ice, including North Africa. The first species of bear to ever actually live in North Africa, however, were brown bears 60,000 years before polar bears likely evolved. So that likely means that the brown bears living in North Africa left the continent, then evolved into polar bears, only to come back and eventually evolve into the Atlas bear. Overall, the Atlas bear largely went extinct due to human activity, but at least it wasn't exploited by humans through severe inbreeding only to be forced into extinction when it became inferior to machines. The turnspit dog lived in the United Kingdom, popping up in or around the 1500s. The dog was described as being short, crooked-legged, long-bodied, and ugly, as well as being bred for one arbitrarily specific purpose: to turn a spit. Back in the day, meat was prepared by putting it on this thing called a cooking spit and slowly turning it over an open fire until it was evenly roasted. Cooking meat this way was quite a chore in ye old times, taking hours just to prepare one hunk of meat. This left the lowest member of the family or a hired spit jack to turn the spit, which left them with burns and blisters most of the time. Then one day some spit jack looked at their pet dog and thought, how can I make your life considerably more miserable than mine? And realized he could just force his idiot, stupid dog to do his work for him. So that's exactly what happened. A contraption was invented and a dog was stuck in it for the perfect method of cooking meat evenly. However, not all was right in the quest for meat, as the living component of the kitchen was pretty badly treated. In order to train it to run at a consistent pace, the owners would shove hot coals into the turnspit's wheel when it began to move too slowly, and would routinely force them to run for hours on end, only catching a break when switching shifts with another turnspit or when they got their day off on Sunday. Yes, even dogs didn't have to work on Sunday during this time. Just kidding, they were used as foot warmers on Sundays. Whenever homeowners attended church, they would bring their dogs with them just to have them sit on their feet to keep them warm. However, this would sometimes cause problems. For example, one time the Bishop of Gloucester was giving a sermon and mentioned the word wheel, which caused multiple turnspit dogs to run for the door in a futile attempt to get to their stations. As the years progressed, the turnspit dog was utilized less and less. After the invention of things like the steam engine and the clock jack in the early to mid 1800s, the turnspit became obsolete, and since no one wanted to keep the dogs as a pet purely because of how ugly they were, the breed went extinct by 1900. The turnspit dog used to be so low ranking and so commonplace that almost no one kept a record of the dog or how it was bred, so we have no lead on how to potentially recreate the breed short of cloning. There are a few documents, however, that detail a few traits of the turnspit dog. For example, John Caius wrote about them in his book Of English Dogs, I'm Not Reading All That, which was actually the first book ever written documenting different dog species. Other than this and a few other documents, not much more is known about the turnspit dog. It seems like the only person in history that cared about these dogs was Queen Victoria, who owned a wealth of retired turnspit dogs, giving them the love their ancestors likely never received. And even though the turnspit dog is extinct, there's still one close relative that's still alive today, and you'll never guess who it is. That's right, the degenerate dogs of Queen Victoria are the closest relatives to the coddled corgis of Queen Elizabeth II, which just goes to show that even the lowest members of any society can find themselves in the highest of places. Except for this next animal, they just got obliterated off the face of the earth. The passenger pigeon was a migratory species of bird that lived in the mid-eastern United States up through the 19th century, being one of the most populous birds in the world at the time, with its historical population numbering anywhere from 3.5 to 5 billion. Not only was the passenger pigeon incredibly numerous, but they traveled together in massive flocks. These flocks usually flew in either narrow columns or in a horrifying mass of avian destruction, sometimes with so many birds in a flock that they completely blotted out the sky. Here's one excerpt by John Audubon describing just how enormous and elegant some flocks of passenger pigeons were. I began to mark with my pencil, making a dot for every flock that passed. In a short time, finding the task which I had undertaken impracticable, I rose, and counting the dots then put down, found that 163 had been made in 21 minutes. The air was literally filled with pigeons, the dung fell in spots, and the continued buzz of wings had a tendency to lull my senses to repose. Before sunset I reached Louisville. The pigeons were still passing in undiminished numbers and continued to do so for 3 days in succession. Oh, yeah, no more from John Audubon, he's dead. In 1866, one other flock was in fact so massive that it was 310 miles long, nearly a mile wide, and it took 14 hours to pass over the observed location. These birds used these extreme numbers to their advantage, with there being so many birds in a singular flock or nest that predators could just eat whoever they wanted until they were satiated, with the whole of the flock being virtually unfazed. Now that I've thoroughly described just how terrifying these migrating flocks are, let me make it just that much more unsettling by saying they sometimes flew as low as 3 feet to the ground. So now your shoes are covered in poop and you failed your 9th grade reading test. Anyways, the passenger pigeon may have wreaked some havoc when on the move, but when a flock chose a place to roost, that place basically became a dead zone for the next 20 years. Passenger pigeon roosts ranged anywhere from a few acres, or roughly the size of one ox gang, to 100 square miles in size. There would be so many pigeons roosting in an area at one time that there was literally no spare branch for them to sit, so some had no choice but to pile right on top of other birds. Along with this, since there were so many pigeons sitting in one place, tree branches, even considerably thick ones mind you, broke under the birds' weight. And these guys weigh like 10 ounces each. Not only did these pigeons mutilate the foliage around them, but they pooped. Oh my goodness, how they'd poop. Sometimes there will be so much foul feces in one area that it will pile up as high as over a foot, effectively suffocating any plants that were growing on the forest floor. So whenever a flock left to roost, what they left behind were tons of broken branches and suffocated poop plants, creating the perfect tinder for ferocious forest fires. These fires caused by the pigeons happen so frequently that over time they learn to make roosts in more flame-resistant trees such as white oaks over other trees like red oaks, so not to, destroy the entire forest. The only chance the forest had to regrow was killing some pigeons in the fire so the acorns they ate would fall and start to regrow, because they swallowed acorns whole. The entire dietary journey of the passenger pigeon is actually just as strange as their eating habits. The PP here ate mostly masts and some invertebrates. Some nuts they ate were produced by the American chestnut, but the tree went nearly extinct due to the chestnut blight, an Asian fungus which disrupted the entire North American ecosystem. This didn't affect the passenger pigeon, however, because they were all dead. As I said before, the passenger pigeon was a migratory species, so they would always store food with them, so if they were hungry later, they would always have something to eat. Now, I suppose you all know what a bird is, so where exactly could they store this food? Do they have little pockets? A secret compartment, perhaps? Actually, kind of. Birds have these things called crops, which is a pouch in their throat used to store food, and can expand up to the size of an orange. The passenger pigeon here in particular had such an exceptional crop and esophagus that, yes, they could swallow acorns whole, something very few birds are able to do. Reportedly, when a bird was shot with a full crop, it would sound like a bag of dropped marbles. So just like. Food that eventually made it to the pigeon's stomach wasn't just along for the ride anymore. Like, they would just get decimated. The passenger pigeon's digestive system was insanely powerful. Unlike other, normal birds that just digest the fruit and poop the seed out elsewhere, any food in their seeds were completely digested in the passenger pigeon, so their poop was essentially worthless. So those poop fields I was talking about earlier, yeah, the forest didn't even get new seeds from that. Just poop. The only time when pigeons actually did their job and dispersed seeds was when they either threw up their crop for better food or died. Dying seemed to be a popular pastime for many passenger pigeons during this time, since hunting them became so widespread. Because they flew in such multitudes and occasionally close to the ground, anyone with literally a rock or a stick could up and kill at least a couple birds just by swinging it around. It was reportedly so easy to kill them that if someone had a gun rather than a stick or stone for some stupid reason, all they had to do was shoot towards the sky without aiming and dozens of birds would fall. People killed birds like this so much and with such effortlessness that the passenger pigeon wasn't even considered a game bird, they were that easy to kill. The diminishing numbers of these pigeons became noticeable by the 1850s, but most people didn't take note of it because they still would fly in massive flocks like idiots. The last large nesting areas of the pigeon were destroyed by the 1870s, and for the next 20 years, the scattered remains of the passenger pigeon population was picked off, with the last recorded wild pigeon being shot in 1902. There were, of course, some claims of sightings after this, however. Theodore Roosevelt claimed to have seen one in 1907, stinking liar, and ornithologist Alexander Wetmore claimed to have seen a pair in 1905. Did you know he lived until 1978? Pretty crazy. After that, there were only a few pigeons left that lived in zoos, all slowly dying off until one passenger pigeon remained, living in the Cincinnati Zoo. Martha. It's unknown exactly when Martha was born, likely around 1885, and I would let this unknowing slide, except that she was born in captivity. One man, Arlie Williams Shorger, even described the history of Martha and the Cincinnati Zoo's collection of passenger pigeons as hopelessly confused, and that it was difficult to find a more garbled history than Martha. So, get your act together, Cincinnati Zoo and others. What we do know is Martha lived most of her life in captivity and was left as the last of her species for 4 years after her friend and the second remaining passenger pigeon, George, died. After this, she then sat alone in her cage at the Cincinnati Zoo, the last of her species, before peacefully passing away by herself on September 1st, 1914. And then they skinned and dissected her. And she may have actually died from a stroke, causing her to suffer as much as even years preceding her death. But you know, whatever. Alright, that's all for this video. Thank you all for... Ah! Why are there bees in my air conditioner?